All right. Getting ready to go live in just a sec. All right, live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Zoom room. Once again, we are back here live with a great panel to talk about everything that is going on across the board in the world of sports. And man, it has been exciting to talk about The Last Dance, the docuseries that ESPN has been airing over the past 2 weeks, and they will continue to do over the next few weeks. So we are happy to bring on a panel to talk about what's been going on. We have Jordan Gould, Kendall Bowers, and Maya Engel here to join me. And there are all their lovely faces. Maya, of course, the Michigan native, repping the Detroit Pistons, the Bad Boys. And Jordan and Kendall, also big basketball fans. We were all talking about everything with Michael Jordan and LeBron James just a couple episodes ago, guys. And man, it's happy to have you all back.
Happy to be back. Thanks for having me.
Nice to be talking about something on TV, you know?
Yeah, right?
Like, these days, so.
I thought it was really interesting how they were covering everything. Like after all of these are aired on ESPN, they immediately go into SportsCenter. Mm-hmm. And it almost makes you feel like you just watched like the NBA finals or something, the way that they're reacting to everything in like real time.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
It's really cool.
Yeah, it's very helpful because, you know, it's been a drought.
I know. Well, Kendall, I want to start with you. I'm going to go around the panel real quick, just get a feel for, you know, how much you guys know about this whole situation, you know, like the way everything was back then. You know, were you a fan? Are you more so on Michael Jordan's side, on the side of the Pistons? Because obviously that stuff has been going on. And obviously we all have a lot to talk about with the NBA in general. So Kendall, I'm going to start with you. Just where do you stand so far? What have you thought, general reactions so far through the first 4 episodes?
First 4 episodes. I had to change my name on my personal Twitter. I am now a Scottie Pippen Stan account. The way the Bulls did Scottie. But, you know, I'm very familiar with Chicago as a whole, being for the sport industry. And, you know, grew up in Chicago, know all the stories and stuff. There's certain things that, you know, I'm learning because, you know, I was born when all the heyday was ending. But, you know, just the management style, the wild stories we got last night. I hope we get some more wild stories, you know, later on. But I'm enjoying the ride.
It's really been interesting to see. And Jordan, you know, you were talking a lot about, you know, everything that you've thought about Michael Jordan and, you know, just kind of where he lies and just the grand scheme of the league, you know, and just what have you thought so far in the episodes you've seen?
He's a winner. I mean, and he's a team player. And I think we've seen a lot of that. I think we saw even more of that in these last couple episodes from last night, where, you know, you bring a guy in like a Dennis Rodman who just beat up on you with the Bad Boy Pistons in the late 80s, and just to bring him on and, you know, knowing who he is and how to deal with him. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk more about that, but just how much of a team player he was, bringing Scottie in and kind of knowing how to work with him. You know, the Horace Grant, who had, you know, one of the best quotes last night, and like Bill Cartwright, all these guys just figuring out how to play with them. You know, Steve Kerr finding John Paxson in the right moment. So certain things like that. You know that Michael wanted to take that last shot every time, but I think it did get to a point where he finally learned and wanted to adapt to like Phil's triangle offense, how to get that to work. So he's a team player, you know, and you're seeing what he was willing to do to win, I think, more and more as these episodes go on.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into a lot of that, especially episode 4, which talked a lot about how Phil Jackson really started to put that offense together. And, you know, that'll be a lot of interesting stuff to dissect too. But before that, we got to introduce Maya, our Michigan native here. You see the Bad Boys sweatshirt. Just what was this like, seeing things from the perspective of so many of these iconic players, especially from you being a Michigan native?
Yeah, no, it's really cool because growing up a Detroit Piston fan, I've obviously seen the Bad Boys 30 for 30 so many times, probably at least 20 times. And that's a completely different perspective than what we're seeing from, this latest episode of The Last Dance where they get into the bad boys. So watching the Bad Boys 30 for 30, I used to not think very highly of Scottie Pippen. I had so much respect for Michael Jordan. Like I said in a couple Zoom rooms back, I think he's the GOAT. But I never was a big fan of Scottie Pippen. I didn't know too much about the Bulls from that era. I just knew about the Bad Boys. So now getting to see it from the other side, for example, when Scottie Pippen had a migraine in the 90 Eastern Conference Finals, in the Bad Boys documentary, they don't really go into any detail. So my family, whenever we watch that, we're like, oh, come on, Scottie Pippen. Like, you got a migraine. You're really going to back out. Like, you're going to be a baby. And then you watch it on The Last Dance, and they go into detail about how he literally couldn't see. He was nauseous. Like, he had never experienced a migraine headache. And then me and my family just looked at each other. We're like, yo, we have been so harsh on this man, but we didn't know, like, what he was actually experiencing until The Last Dance. So it's really interesting to get the other side of the story.
Yeah, and everybody always forgets about that too. Like we've been covering, we talk about it in Chicago. It's like the lore of the Bulls has always just been discussed forever. And yet no one ever really talks about what happened with Scottie Pippen there. And then you saw Michael Jordan even saying like, hey man, if he has a migraine, like he has a migraine, there's nothing else we can do. But then, I think that really speaks to where sports is and like the expectations of athletes to just play through things like that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, no question. And, Kendall, you definitely have talked about, how, these teams, like we've talked about the influence of Michael Jordan, and, it'll be interesting to get Maya's perspective on this in a second, but, just the way that the Pistons were this big obstacle for Jordan to overcome in order to get to that echelon that we really saw him get to in the 90s. How much do you think that played into his actual career and his development?
I was kind of thinking about this last night when I was watching it, because like Maya said, I've only seen the Pistons 30 for 30 once because I love 30 for 30s. And it was very interesting. Not being from around Detroit, I'm aware about the Pistons. I knew about the Pistons when, Chauncey and Carmelo were playing over there, So, but like getting to know like the Bad Boys through there, it was like, dang, they're bad. They're, they lived up to the hype. They did what they had to do. Like they were saying last night, I think it was Lambier who said, it was either Lambier or Thomas. He was just like, after a certain while, you just have to start giving into it. You just have to, if people are going to continuously paint you as such. And for me, with the Pistons kind of coming in at that transition point from the reign of Larry and Magic in the 80s to transition into Michael in the 90s, it's kind of like that I don't want to call it a blip, but for lack of a better word, it's a blip. It's a transition phase, because unfortunately, Isaiah Thomas was never the Magic, never the Larry, never the Michael. So it was just kind of like that point where it's like the Pistons are here and they kind of went away. So for Michael to have to overcome that, I think it definitely plays into it, because they were a very solid team with Joe Dumars, you had Sally, you had Lambier, you had Dennis Rodman. It was a very solid team. They were coached by, wasn't his name Daly?
Chuck Daly.
Daly.
A genius coach. So it's just, you have to have that initial thing that you have to overcome in order to be considered the greatest, whether you believe he's the greatest or not. I do, but you have to overcome something to solidify your legacy.
Yeah. And, Maya, I want to go back to you on that now, because that was something that you brought up when we were talking about Michael Jordan last time. You said that if it wasn't for those 2 years that, Jordan really had to overcome that adversity, Jordan wouldn't have became who he was. So, just get into that a little bit more. Like, what is it that you really think propelled him?
Yeah, well, Michael Jordan even said it himself in the documentary. He said in those 2 years where the Pistons just crushed us, he was a I think he said scrawny. He obviously wasn't scrawny, but like in his mind, that's what he said. He's like, I was a small kid back then and I didn't have what it takes to beat such a physical team. So then he said, I worked hard that summer. I started lifting weights and just working more on getting my weight up. And so he kind of even said it himself, like if it wasn't for the Pistons and their physical mindset and their way of play, then he wouldn't have been able to compete the way he did, especially in 91. If that summer he didn't spend training and weightlifting, and he also encouraged his fellow teammates to also be like, guys, we got to pump up in the weight room. If we want to beat the Pistons, we got to get physically tougher because the Pistons blew them out the previous 2 years. So I will go my entire life saying that I don't think Michael Jordan would be the player he's known for today if it wasn't for the toughness of the Detroit Pistons and the Bad Boys. And I think most people would agree with me, right, guys?
I definitely.
Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think every superstar has really always had to overcome, some team. And you think of Jordan, you think of the Pistons. I mean, now you think of, most recently with LeBron, since everyone wants to compare LeBron to Jordan. You had, the 08 Celtics. You had that Celtics team for a while that just consistently beat them in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then, I mean, even most recently, you had the Warriors where they met in the finals because, I mean, East-West. But, there's always been a team that seems to maybe put a challenge into these superstars. And it goes back, even before Jordan, it's things like this happen. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's definitely speaks to the development and kind of, I don't know, just that gave a player like Jordan maybe the motivation to come back stronger. I love that anecdote. Like as soon as they lost, they met as a team. They're like, okay, what are we going to do to, get back here, beat the Pistons this time? And Jordan said, I'm going to put on weight. I'm going to put on 10 to 15 pounds. We heard from his trainer and kind of the process he went to. They weren't taking vacations. They were getting right into the weight room. I love seeing something like that. I mean, it was kind of just a comeback story kind of thing. And, at that time when the Bulls hadn't won any titles, and then a lot changed in the 90s, from the start to the end.
And I think that says a lot about that Bulls team. It made it more special that they did win their first title after all that happened,
Absolutely.
Yeah, they had, I mean, go ahead, Kendall.
Oh, I definitely think that if it was like, today, they definitely would have been, because when Michael and Dennis were talking about like, yeah, we went straight to the locker room, we skipped vacation. I just know that if it was today, they would have been in there listening to Murder on My Mind by Melly every time they were in that gym. Because like that's that type of, it's like one time you lose one time, it's like, okay, we'll come back, we'll get them next year. To get blown out twice in a row when people are, belittling your career, saying you're not a team player, saying you're just here to, rack up the personal ranks. No, they were all in there as a unit, just ready to overcome that obstacle of the Pistons.
Yeah. And, Jordan, I want to go back to you on, something you were just talking about, how like it seems as though every team, that has kind of taken over, they've had to take the reins from somebody else, and that was obviously the case with the Bulls taking it from the Pistons. But specifically when it comes to Jordan, do you think that it was more significant for him to, as a younger player, to go against teams that even Isaiah Thomas mentioned, like the Celtics and the Pistons and the Lakers, to go against a team like the Celtics, say, back in '86 when he's scoring 60 points on them? Is it more significant in those moments when he's really young, developing himself as a player, or do you think it's more significant when he actually dethrones a champion in the Pistons later on?
No, I think both of those, you point to the Boston scenario, you point to the Pistons. I think in each of those losses that he faced, I think he grew in part. I think with Boston, it showed he's scoring, was it 62, 63 points in that game. It was a double overtime game and it still wasn't enough. I think that kind of showed, hey, I can't do this all on my own. I think that's what showed. And then you had the development of a player like Pippen who comes along. And by the time Jordan and the Bulls are ready to face those Pistons, you have a new coach in Phil Jackson that comes on, right? Doug Collins on his way out, which I thought was another interesting kind of storyline.
We'll get into that
last night. Yeah. But, coming on and facing the Pistons, then the storyline and the narrative changed to, it wasn't more the help. It was more that the Bulls weren't tough enough. They just weren't tough enough. They didn't have the mindset that the Pistons had the mental edge over the Bulls. And you think about what defines greatness, and you think of, a sport like baseball, for instance, where how many times have you heard of the old cliche, baseball's a 90% mental game, 10% physical, and while you still need the physical attributes like in any sport, like basketball, it's sometimes it's a mind game. I mean, you saw Rodman just shove Pippen and how, in the night, and I think it was 91, right? And he just kind of sat there and stared and just stared into space and was like, okay, we'll play this way. Got right back up and made his free throw. So I think at that point, the Pistons realized, okay, Bulls kind of fought back a little bit, and maybe they're a little mentally stronger than they were the year before. So I think for Jordan, I think there were two different things. Maybe with the Celtics, maybe he realized I couldn't do this on my own, so he had to adapt his game in that way to more of a team style game. Come when the Bad Boy Pistons come around, and then when they faced the Pistons in those back-to-back years and lost, I think he definitely had to change his mental edge and competitiveness, not only for him but that entire team. So I think those are the things that he could maybe learn from both of those experiences.
Do you guys agree with that?
Definitely.
Yeah, I agree. And I definitely think it is all a process. Like a team doesn't just come in and win their first year. They don't win a title their first year. It takes, first of all, you have to play the Celtics and you have to play your heart out and still lose to then get to the next step. So it was all a process. And I mean, it paid off. They got to the point where if they could beat the Bad Boys in 91, they could beat anyone. And obviously they did because they were world champions.
Yeah. And, Jordan actually helped segue that perfectly. And Maya, I'll kick it to you now, just talking about Dennis Rodman specifically. And obviously episode 3 really highlighted just everything. And there's so much to unpack there. And we're just going to take it one step at a time because I want to get your guys' perspective on this stuff, especially comparing it to like the modern day NBA, which we are obviously very familiar with.
Mhm.
And just looking at a situation like that, you got to see him, I mean, not live, but Detroit and the state of Michigan got to see him when he was developing with Chuck Daly, and then eventually he winds up going to the arch nemesis in Chicago. So I know as a Chicagoan myself, we embraced him with open arms, which I always thought was so peculiar.
Yeah.
Because it's like that would be like somebody from like the Cardinals like going to the Cubs, and then we're just like, oh yeah, like yay, we love you, like
Yeah.
welcome. Like it seems so unusual, and yet you got to see him on both teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was really weird watching when they showed footage of the Bad Boys when they would play Chicago, when Dennis Rodman would push down Scottie Pippen and how aggressive he was against Michael Jordan and all of them. And then going like a few years later, seeing him on their team. It's weird to watch that. But I don't know who exactly said this, but I know for a while the Bulls were kind of iffy about Dennis Rodman because, he's a character. He has a lot of, I guess you could say maybe baggage that goes along with him besides just his talent and whatnot. But they knew that, under Phil Jackson and with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, they could handle Dennis Rodman and they could kind of tame him and get to the point where he can be the best player he had the potential to be. And that's exactly what they did. But I do think that if he would have went to a different team, like you look when he played for San Antonio in between those years between the Pistons and the Bulls, it was just not the same Dennis Rodman that we think of today. His mind wasn't in it. His heart wasn't in it. He needed a team like the Bulls to really give it his all. But yeah, no, it's still weird to this day to think like Dennis Rodman went from hating on the Bulls and just not having a ton of respect for them, beating them up, to then joining them. It's weird for sure.
What did you guys think of just the whole mindset of Rodman as he transitioned from high school to, just being like this player who, went to like a small college and just wanted to play, just loved the game and just wanted to play as well as he could on both ends of the floor all the time, to just developing into this just almost like diva persona, like just a completely, transcendent person in the league. What was it, do you think, that really was the tipping point for him?
When he dated Madonna.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Yeah, it's that intersection of like pop culture and sports there. Because Dennis said it himself, like it wasn't until he had that like sort of self-awakening that he kind of like became the Dennis Rodman that I know. Like Dennis, like I always associated Dennis Rodman with the Bulls because that's what I grew up around. That's the area I grew up around. So when I learned that Dennis played with the Bad Boys Pistons, it's just like, huh? Like, how does that work type of thing. to be able to transition to play with that team, be literally whooping on your future teammates and be able to work cohesively as a unit. And I believe that, kind of like what Maya was saying, touching on, just being able to be embraced by your coach, be embraced by your teammates and understood was basically all Dennis really needed. That's what he said himself. It's just a matter of, this is who I am. I'm more than a player. I'm going to do what you all need me to do. But at the end of the day, I'm still myself. So you let me be myself. I got you on the court. You get what you pay me for.
Rodman on the Bulls worked because Rodman respected Jordan. I mean, even more so than his head coach and anyone on there. Because he knew what Jordan was and what he was capable of doing, right? So I don't know. I think that's why it works so well in Chicago. I mean, after, like you said, Kendall, like he's on the Bad Boy Pistons, being a bully, pushing people down left and right, playing as physical as he does, and then he goes, wait, he goes to the Chicago? He goes to their pretty much like their arch nemesis. How does that work? I think of a smaller scale because he isn't as good of a player as Dennis Rodman is, but you think of those Heat Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals with like Lance Stevenson and LeBron, and with the blowing, he would just do all these stupid antics to try to get in his head.
Right.
And then now, last year they were teammates, and on the Lakers, and you're like, really? It came kind of full circle. So I don't know. It's just, I think a lot of the times players respect, I think there's a certain level of respect, right? I mean, you realize how good players like LeBron now is and Jordan was then. And, I think these kind of building block players like a Dennis Rodman, who's kind of was essential to the Bulls' success. He was a rebound, a hustle guy, played fantastic lockdown defense, stuff like that, to kind of respect those players at the end of the day, and kind of put everything else aside.
And it was interesting too to see how he really didn't even want to play for the Bulls. Like he went in to meet with Phil Jackson, and he's like he's got like his hat on. He doesn't even like stand up to like shake Phil's hand. And Phil's just like, I don't care. Like we're gonna get you. Mm-hmm. And like it just kind of speaks to how significant of a player he was, at that time. And I guess, Maya, did you feel when they were portraying him in kind of that bad boy light, do you think that was something that he developed in Detroit that he was never really able to shake? Or do you think that kind of changed once he got to Chicago and he really started to blend in as kind of that third wheel, as they talked about with Jordan and Pippen? Did it reshape his image?
Definitely, because I think at that point, people stopped thinking of him as a bad boy and started thinking of him as a great Chicago Bull, one of the best of that time. But he still carried around his physical game. It's not like he changed as a player. I just think the way people saw him change, like they see him at Detroit and they're like, oh, he's a bad boy. He's trying to hurt people. This man is bad. And then he goes to the Bulls. Everyone's like, he's so aggressive and physical and he's going to win us a title. And we love him. So like I said, like he didn't change his style of play. People just saw him in a different light. Mm-hmm. That's what I think anyway.
Right. Yeah. And Kendall, did you think that after he got to Chicago, do you think that it was something that was better for him, like in his career? Like, would we still think of him as the same player if he had stayed in Detroit that whole time as we do with him playing with the Bulls?
Absolutely not. I mean, subtract his like personal awakening, I definitely feel like for me, it's very important to notice like the relationships that are held between a coach and their players. And Dennis had great relationships with both Daly and Jackson. They both understood his mental. They were both able to connect with him. They were able to read him as a person, to be able to know how to deal with him as a player. And I feel like with Dennis being in Chicago, Phil just kind of, especially with going back to Phil's own personality, he just kind of like not go with the flow, but like, just being able to focus. And if you try to corral somebody who's too much of a free spirit, you're going to like just discombobulate them as an entirety. So in order for Dennis to be one with his game, he had to be one with himself and do what he needed to do to just like release. So I definitely feel like No, I definitely don't feel like he would be the same player that we consider him today if he didn't have that coach behind him. Both of the coaches, but like Phil, especially after his like own self-awakening, Phil was able to work more so with that because Phil himself is a very low-key guy, very in tune, very mellow. Phil's kind of like a beatnik to me. He goes on his own path. Like that's it. Phil's on his own path, and it's on his path they can ride along together.
You know, my favorite kind of moment from last night, I think it was Phil and Michael were talking and about Dennis Rodman, and they're like, all right, you know, Phil's just trying to figure out how to coach him, and Jordan's like, you know, he's a Mustang, you can't put a saddle on him, you know, you can't corral him. He's gonna ride, he's gonna do what he's gonna do.
One of the best lines.
Yeah. So
Chuck Daly said that, didn't he?
Yeah, it was daily about Rodman.
it might have been Daly. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah,
don't know, I
that's a
think that
great
just
quote.
describes his personality. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, you're just gonna have to let him be, you know,
Yeah.
because
Well, you see that transitions perfectly into my favorite part of both episodes, which was the Vegas story. The fact that seriously, because that's what he said that he told, I think it was Steve Kerr said, you just got to let like a player like that, you got to give him some rope. That's what he said. He's like, you got to just let him do his thing and he'll come back better than ever. So, you know, Jordan just kind of like when Rodman got to Chicago, he's playing there. He's a loose cannon. They have no idea what to expect from him. They just know that he's going to play his butt off every single game. You know, what did you think of that? And a player on an NBA team just saying, hey, I'm going to go, you know, take a couple days, which wound up being more than just a couple days, to just go hang out and just literally just party in Vegas in the middle of the season.
you know, I loved it. There was so much reaction on Twitter. I think Donovan Mitchell put something out. He's like, Dennis Rodman invented load management. I mean, like seriously. I mean, the original load management, like DNP Vegas. Like I don't know. He
Why
was,
has a lot to
carrying the
learn from
load.
that.
I mean, he was carrying the load. I mean, Pippen was holding out, of course. I mean, he was unhappy with his situation in this final season with Krause and, you know, the management maybe not giving what he wanted. And he decided to come back, and Rodman was like, Phil, I'm tired. I want a vacation, you know, and he's like, all right, let's see what Michael thinks about this. Cause I mean, I don't know, Michael was the real ringleader of that locker room.
Mhm.
And, you know, Jordan was fine with it, but I mean, he was saying, I don't know if he's going to come back. I mean, so it was kind of wild. And I don't know. I mean, it's hard to fathom that something like that could happen in this day and age, you know, but certainly made for a really, I thought, the most entertaining part of last night's episodes.
Oh, absolutely. I was trying to think of what player I could see doing something like that today. And I'm just like, I don't really see it from anybody. I mean, like it goes back to just knowing your players. I found it hilarious when Michael was talking about the conversation initially, and Michael's like, yeah, no, he's not coming back. So, you know, he's not coming back. So after that, I just imagine after that 48 hours, when it hit that 1 minute mark going into the 49th hour, Michael just looking at Phil like, I told you so. So now what? Now you look dumb type of thing. And it's just like, because Michael and Dennis were so opposites in the sense of, I feel like Michael's a very by the book. He's very fundamental. He's very rigid. He's very strict with himself. And he wants his team to not be strict, but at the same time, it's like, we're here to win. So let's do what we need to do to win and then worry about all the XYZ later. And that conflicted with Dennis, but just being able to, once again, like just know your teammates and know them personally. He just kind of like, you know, he complied with it. I don't think he'll agree to it. He complied with it, but he's just complying and then kind of just like, you know, I told you so. Like, now we got to go get him type of thing.
Yeah, I feel like that was one of the most Dennis Rodman things Dennis Rodman has ever done. And it was the part in the documentary where then they go to the interview of Dennis Rodman and he's like, I went to effing Vegas, and he just starts laughing. It just cracked me up because the thing is, I think everyone expected him to come back and just, you know, be out of shape or not be doing well, but he came back and he was just as good as a player before he left. So sure, it's not the most professional thing to do, but for someone like Dennis Rodman, I mean, he clearly needed a vacation, and it clearly, I mean, it didn't pay off, but it didn't really set the Bulls back
And it was
Right.
it was so on brand too. I mean, for you talked about he came back, he was in shape. I love that whole Indian run anecdote
Yes.
yesterday where, Jordan's talking to Kerr and all them. He's like, and they were pissed because they were having to do, Rodman's conditioning to get him back in shape. But it turned out, they were just jogging along, and then Rodman would get to the front of the line and bolt and sprint. And they said it took him 4 laps to catch up,
Yeah.
to get to the front. So I
You
mean,
guys
I
have
don't
to
know.
do
That
the
was
Indian
great.
drill, like when you played sports or
Yep.
anything in high school?
I had to do it with a medicine ball, and we'd have to pass it back in the
Oh, that's
line.
way
No
worse.
way.
Jordan,
Intense.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
What
wow.
sport was that?
It was baseball.
I
Mm,
guess that makes sense.
makes sense.
That's just
Yeah.
evil, though. I would not. I would like. I would
Yeah.
rebel. I would pull a Rodman on that and be like, "Yeah, I'm gonna take a 48-hour vacation after that workout."
Yeah, but we all told each other going in, all right, no one sprint. It's like kind of what
Yeah.
Jordan. It's like just take it easy.
Yeah.
But then there'd
Is-
always be the try hard, and that was Rodman.
Yeah.
Is there any way that any player in the league now would be able to just not not necessarily Vegas? Like, obviously that's an extreme example. That's a very Dennis Rodman thing. But like, would a player of like his caliber, like say the Warriors during their run, like Draymond Green just says, I want to take like 3 days off because I'm just so burnt out. Like, would the media have a field day? Would they just be calling him lazy? Or would they be like, no, I understand it? Like, what would happen?
They would definitely call Draymond lazy
Mhm.
because I feel like the difference between Draymond and Dennis is their like own, not personality, but like Draymond's kind of, on and off the court, he's kind of the same person, if you get what I'm saying. I feel like Dennis had a label on his head because he did the crazy piercings, the crazy hairstyles, marrying himself, all sorts of stuff. They wanted to make him a bad guy, but like at the root of it all, Dennis was just like a cool person. He's a cool dude. He said himself he's kind of introverted himself, even though like his personality, his style is way out there. But Draymond, yeah, no, and it definitely wouldn't go. And I think the other difference is between then and now is like a lot of athletes take conditioning very seriously. Like conditioning has definitely changed completely over the past 20, 30 years. So just that alone, like I know a lot of athletes don't like to drink during the season. They don't like to smoke. They don't like to go out and party because they're so in tune with their bodies and they don't want to risk anything. So I definitely don't think that would happen. And social media has to also factor into that. So social media will be off the chain if Draymond did that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's hard for me to find an NBA comparison. I don't know. I think of like maybe a Marshawn Lynch. I could see him doing something just because he's retired, come back. He's like the Seahawks are like, yeah, you come back for a game. We need a running back. I mean, last season. I mean, I don't know. He just messes around. He's just a goofy guy. I don't know. But NBA, it's tough to find I don't know, a character that because I mean, I don't know. I think there are maybe a lot more personalities in the NBA than maybe in the past, just because I think players are more vocal. But I don't know. A lot of the times, the media and a lot of I think it was in the first or second episode. I don't remember who was talking about it, but they kind of I don't know. Well, just like train them how to talk, and I don't know. It's like you don't have a lot of personality, so that's why Dennis Rodman was so different then.
Yeah.
I agree with you guys. I do not think that would fly in today's day, especially like you said, Kendall, because of social media. Everybody, not just sports journalists, everybody who has a cell phone or computer would be ripping Draymond a new one, calling him lazy, hating on him. It would not be pretty. So Draymond, if you're watching, we know you are, don't do it.
He's on the live stream right now.
Yeah.
All he has to do is watch the Zoom room. Yeah. And, another thing that absolutely wouldn't fly, and this is kind of fly today in today's league, and this is kind of the last point that I want to make about episode 3 before we get into everything that was in episode 4, is just how physical the Pistons played and really the league was at the time that Jordan was playing. And, it's no discredit to defenders in the modern day league, but my goodness, like all of these stars and just players in general, they had to literally go to war every single game. And Maya, your Pistons were right at the forefront of that. They really transformed everything to make that the focal point of their defense. So did you think that was something that was, I mean, obviously it was effective. Was it right to do?
Whew. Well,
Yeah.
Put her on the hot seat. Yeah.
yeah,
know.
wow. I would say probably not the right thing to do, but at that time, the game was so different that even though it wasn't right, it was still acceptable. They were still getting away with it.
Mhm.
And, the Pistons had the Jordan rules, which basically they said, all right, we're going to get Jordan to the corner and we're going to double team him. If he happens to get in the paint and he jumps in the air, he is going down.
Take him
Bill
out.
Laimbeer and
Yeah.
Rick Moore are there to make sure he's on the ground. So, like I said, was it the right thing to do? Well, it paid off for them. They beat the Bulls. They had to do what they had to do. But if you're comparing it to like today's style of play, everyone, no, that would not be the right thing to do. People still gave the Pistons a lot of crap. They thought they were dirty. They called them thugs. They said they were trying to hurt the Bulls and whatnot. But you got to do what you got to do to beat Michael Jordan and the Bulls,
Mhm. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I definitely agree. Like the Jordan rules, nothing like that would work today. Like I remember growing up, like, and just my parents saying when like kind of like more things became like fouls and more things became technicals, like how easy it became to get those type of offenses. In comparison, like just being able to watch those, like that footage of a full blown brawl happening on the court. Like I'm not saying that they don't fight on the court nowadays, but at the same time, it was kind of expected. Like I saw a clip on Twitter of a ref dragging Scottie Pippen out after he'd been knocked out on the floor, and them having to keeping the game in regulation.
That was
And I'm
crazy.
just like, what? Like that wouldn't happen today. And
Absolutely not.
players today, I don't think that their mental, I'll say, would be on the same level as it was back in the day, because people flop on the floor now. People, they want their fouls. And when they want their fouls, they're not 9 times out of 10 going to get them, but there's more likely they're going to be drawn.
Yeah. It's a superstar driven league, and the NBA protects them now these days. I mean, you see how many times does James Harden go to the line each game? I mean, it's a little ridiculous. We've gone from a point where, refs are literally dragging bodies off of the court in play to a little touch foul, that a lot of times might be a flop, or we've seen so many missed calls where, players or defenders are not even touching someone and the ref blows a whistle. I mean, when you see it on a replay. So I don't know. It's just little stuff. Just shows you about the evolution of the game.
Right. And John Sally said in, I think it was episode 4, that back then the refs didn't protect the savior, like they weren't all focused on, we can't let Michael Jordan get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
We have to protect him at all costs. It wasn't like that back then.
Yeah. I mean, it speaks to the two different eras, of the league. And it's been interesting to see how things have changed. I am kind of glad, like I love the way the league is played now. I love how it's like shooting focused and like everything's all great, but it has become so soft. I can only imagine what it would have been like back then. But, that's pretty much everything they covered, from across the board with with Rodman and the Pistons, and just everything through that, that 3rd episode. But the 4th episode was so centric on the development of Phil Jackson, and then eventually the, first championship run of Michael Jordan. And, Jordan, I want to start with you on this. We kind of talked about the transition earlier between Doug Collins and Phil Jackson, and, what that really did for the organization, and specifically for Jordan himself, how, Doug Collins was kind of the individualized, Michael Jordan, very focused on him. And then Phil really adopted that mindset into team first. So what did you think about the contrast of those coaches and where it took Jordan's career?
Yeah, I think it speaks a lot to Jordan's willingness to adapt to different coaches, because like you're saying, he really liked Doug Collins. I mean, Doug Collins played through Jordan. He gave him the ball, let him take the shots, even if it might have not been the best shot for the team. Well, you bring in Phil Jackson, and it wasn't necessarily the same. I mean, he was more of a, if Paxson's open in the wing, pass him the ball, give him the ball, because teams would begin doubling Jordan, as Phil Jackson kind of knew, teams like the Pistons would adapt. I mean, if Jordan's going to continuously take that shot, other teams would begin developing schemes against that to try to prevent him from driving inside, or, in these one-on-one matchups. So I think it spoke a lot about Jordan and his ability to kind of adapt to a different coach and learn, hey, we might not be able to just win if it's all me all the time. I mean, and I don't know, I think he proved that in the Bulls championship run, as that triangle offense began to develop more and more. The constant motion, players always moving, switching, not standing still. So I think that spoke a lot to the Bulls' success.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and going off of that, I would say it seemed like it took Michael a little bit of time to adjust to the new coaching style and whatnot, because I know in the documentary at one point, Phil Jackson told Michael there's no I in team. And then Michael said, well, there's an I in win. So I think he kind of had that mindset where like, okay, sure, there's no I in team, but if you get me the ball, I'll win for us. So it took him a little while to be able to adjust to be like, okay, this is a team game. It's not just the Michael Jordan show. It wasn't just like in one day, like, all right, let's go team, you know? It took some time.
Yeah, he didn't want Bill Cartwright taking the last shot. I mean, I think he said something about it yesterday, giving the ball and on a hook that he missed. So yeah, no, he spoke about it.
Yeah.
Did you think, Kendall, that the development of the triangle was something that really changed the way that Jordan played the game? Or do you think he was able to kind of resist that, in the sense that if he doesn't want someone like Bill Cartwright to take that last shot, he doesn't have to adhere to what the coach is saying, he's just going to do his own thing?
It definitely came with, along, as Michael said, just being able to trust your teammates. Like, he was against it at first. He was against, Phil coming in as the head coach, because he knew what Phil was about, more of a team aspect than an individual aspect. And then especially when he was kind of not spoiled with Collins, but Collins is like, this is a Michael Jordan offense. Now he has to transition from not only a head coach, but a playing style where it went centered on him to centered on a team, full team dynamic, full five person on the court dynamic. And I also think that part of the reason that he was able to, because correct me if I'm wrong, I think he said it was like he had his initial apprehension, but he kind of like, he came into it pretty quickly, like the whole triangle offense dynamic. And I also think that goes into just the mental aspect of the media saying you're here to, win scoring titles, win these titles, personal titles, as opposed to actual championships. So that definitely, I feel like, played a part in Michael being able to give into the triangle offense. But that just also comes into being able to read the floor, read the court, being able to think as you're playing, as opposed to just focusing on, making the shot, trying to make the shot and, risking it when your teammate has the open shot, and being able to know which teammate is good in which situation. And just that constant rotation. Like Phil said, like, to know that there's like 33 different type of outcomes, I'm just like, that's such a specific number. But that just attests to like how deeply involved and deeply rooted he studied that method that winners gave to him. So I definitely think so.
I got a question for you, Brandon, since you're the Chicago guy here.
Yeah.
What do you think of the Bulls deciding to move on from Doug Collins at the time that they did it, where really they weren't struggling? I mean, what they had was, they were winning. But they might necessarily been getting over the hump, which at that point was the Pistons. Do you think the timing, obviously it paid off, but maybe in the moment, were you surprised that they decided to make the coaching change?
Definitely. And I actually, obviously I didn't see it live, but like I am familiar, and I always wondered, because we have this image as like Bulls fans of Michael Jordan knocking down that shot against the Cavs in the playoffs, and he's celebrating, and it's like that, he jumps up and he's like punching the air, and then Doug Collins was his coach, and the next shot you see is Doug Collins with his arms in the air running onto the court. And they show that, just like the Watt shot at an Indiana game, they show that like almost every single Bulls game. That, and then the Utah shot, the shot, the last, where he won, his final championship. And like, it's so ingrained in the mind, you would think that he would have been a more storied part. And he was, to a certain extent, he was very significant in the history of the franchise. But you really think that maybe if he had stayed, like, did they need Phil to win? That's going to be the real question that we'll never really know the answer to. Did they really need Phil Jackson to win that first championship? Or would the development of Jordan, even without the triangle, still have allowed for a championship to come to Chicago with Doug Collins there? I think that Phil's mindset, just the way that he was able to control so many big personalities in the same way that Steve Kerr was able to do with the Warriors, with Kevin Durant, with Steph Curry, with Draymond to a certain extent, with, obviously it would be Rodman in the case of the Bulls. You need at least somebody who's good. And what's funny is that Steve Kerr is a perfect example because he was on that team with Phil Jackson, learning that from Phil Jackson, which is why those two teams were able to be as dominant as they were for as long as they were. So it'll always be interesting. It's like the forever, like it always hangs over the heads,
That's true. And you always think about, I think Jordan brought it up, when they did lose to the Pistons back-to-back years, he just said it wasn't their time. They weren't ready. But, he was implying that at some point they were going to be ready and their window was going to open. So you talk about teams having windows. I mean, the Warriors window, obviously it seems it just closed, but, teams have these windows.
Yeah.
And the Pistons had, the Celtics had it before, and then the Bulls came along. So maybe that window was going to come regardless of the coach. But yeah, like you said, we'll never really know.
Yeah. And it's like the same thing as, and it's so interesting how many parallels there are between the Warriors and Bulls, because when the Warriors were under Mark Jackson before Steve Kerr got there, Mark Jackson
they
was
were
like
winning.
kind of their Doug Collins. Like they were developing, they were all there. It just took one more year, and all of a sudden they've got 67 wins and an NBA title.
Right man, right time. I mean, right? I mean, I don't know. That's what it kind of feels like it. But
yeah. Do you guys think that there is a modern day equivalent to Phil Jackson amongst any of the NBA coaches that have been in the league for a while now?
In terms of what?
In terms of his approach to coaching.
Pop.
Maybe not necessarily his championships, but his approach, yes. And who do you think it is?
I say Pop, because for me, like, there's star caliber coaches in the sense that they have so many successes under their belts. But in terms of just like approach to the game, and I'll even say Pop is still different because Phil's coached Michael, he's coached Pippen, he's coached Rodman, he's coached Kobe, he's coached Shaq, and led them all to championships. Those are like superstar, super celebrity players. Pop has been in San Antonio for the past 20 odd years, and he's coached, oh Lord, is it David Robinson? Yes. Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili. I love the Spurs. I love Pop. And Kawhi is the biggest name, like not the biggest name, but none of those players are like, they're superstars for NBA fans. But if you're not an NBA fan, you're not talking about them. Kawhi more so now, but even then, Kawhi is not with the rah-rah of being a celebrity. So I'll give it to Popovich, because Popovich he doesn't care about that. All he cares about is winning. All he cares about is basketball, playing the Spurs game, and that's really all it is to say about it.
Do you guys agree? Popovich is kind of the guy now, or at least the closest thing.
I think he is. Yeah. Go ahead, Maya. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm just going off everything Kendall said. I think you're spot on with that, Kendall. Popovich is a guy who he can take a team that, sure, they might have one or two superstars, but for the most part, he focuses on, the teamwork. He doesn't focus on, okay, get the ball to Michael Jordan. Like that's not his game plan. So, yeah, I would say Popovich.
Yeah, and I think Greg Popovich, like Phil Jackson was, I mean, very loyal to the players, a player's coach. I think he was a listener. Phil Jackson was, even in his times with the Lakers, I mean, think about it. He coached two, arguably maybe top 5 players in NBA history. He had the chance to coach Kobe and Jordan. I mean, how many people get to say they did that? So I don't know. You never hear anything bad about Phil Jackson, and I think it's very similar. You never really hear anything bad about Greg Popovich. I mean, around the league and just kind of the support, and then, but most of all is the winning, right? The success. I mean, that's what keeps them. And both had long terms, and was able to sustain success for long periods of time.
Yeah. And, something that just came to mind as you were talking about that and just fostering those relationships with those players, how important that is. One thing that I think is a huge contrast between the NCAA and the NBA, and I've always thought this, is that I've always felt like the historically great college coaches have always been so much more strict and harsh and loud and in your face. Like someone like, Mike Krzyzewski, or even, Coach K. Like there's so many, Cal, like there's so many people at Kentucky, like there's so many people that they've become so known for just losing their temper with these kids, but it works because it wins. But then they try to go to the NBA, like both of them, or at least, Cal did. He tried to go to the NBA and it just didn't translate because these players kind of need to have that rope, so to speak. They need to be able to do their thing. So do you think that kind of tells a greater story about how these coaches have been so successful, like Pop, and like, people like Phil Jackson, just really fostering those relationships and just letting the players be themselves?
I definitely think it's different, like kind of using Cal as an example, where it's like your success, Cal and Hoiberg in most recent years with the Bulls himself, where you have success as a college coach, but you don't have that same type of success as a professional coach, goes to knowing your players, but being able, it's time, I believe, because when you're 18 to 22 years old, 23 years old, you're still young. You're still used to having that authority over you. You're not grown. You're definitely not paying, well, not definitely not, but you're more than likely not paying any bills. You're still really listening to what your parents say. You still have professors. So it's not like you're in charge of your own self completely just yet when you're in college. So definitely being all up in your face with, if LeBron had an all up in your face coach, I don't necessarily think it would work, because LeBron is like, people are going to associate LeBron before they associate who's coaching. It's LeBron first, foremost, that type of thing. So it's like that egos as well. Whereas with the coaching program in college, it's like, okay, this is Coach K's Duke team, and then whatever good player you have on that lineup. And then there's also a high turnover rate with collegiate athletes, because you're there 4 or 5 years tops, but a lot of players are doing one and dones now. So it's like not a lot of time to get to know people. Whereas on a professional team, you're there for the duration of your contract, or you might be the team player for your entire career. So that takes time, and it's more personal, because it's like, yeah, I'm having a Christmas party, team come to my Christmas party type of thing. It's more personal. You're on the road together more frequently. Like, that's your job. It's kind of like you live where you work as well. So I definitely think there's a lot of factors that play into it. It's a lot more time spent, and time is spent differently when you're doing it with your team and coach in a professional aspect.
Right. And you kind of touch on this, Kendall, but when you're a college player, the coach's main goal, obviously they're focusing on the now, and they want to win championships, but they're also focusing on, okay, I need to develop these players and get them ready to go pro, because going from NCAA to NBA is a big transition. So you might not be focused on like more personal relationships rather than building up their toughness and physically preparing them to take the next level.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah. And it does take a lot too for these coaches to be able, like for somebody like Phil Jackson to be able to have the respect from someone like Michael Jordan, and all of these great players, like to have the respect of Tim Duncan, when you're Popovich, and to have like all of these, and for Chuck Daly to have control. Isn't that interesting how Chuck Daly was actually super relaxed when it came to like getting along with his players, whereas like maybe in the game he gets pretty aggressive when it comes to the coaching, but like it's such a contrast to like the players themselves. You would think, oh well, they're the bad boys, they need to be like yelled at and disciplined all the time, but then you see Chuck Daly with his arm around Dennis Rodman's shoulder, almost like a father figure to these guys. And it's because they are like a father figure to a lot of these players.
Exactly. And a lot of these players, like you said, Kendall, they do spend a lot of time with their NBA coaches, where in college you spend maybe 1 to 5 years with your coaches. So it's just a different relationship.
Yeah. And, it's just been interesting to see how that's changed. And, now as we look and, towards the end of the episode, they really get into what it took to get to that championship level. That first year, in 1991, that was really the point when the Bulls were able to officially dethrone, so to speak, the Pistons as the NBA's, best team, and really take over and kind of set the stage for everything that was about to happen over the next decade. And, what did you guys think as you saw, just Jordan's development, the way Jackson had really taken the reins and just taken it to another level? what was it about that 91 team that was so special compared to, the teams that had just been knocking on the door just a couple years before?
I'll definitely say it's their player aspect. Like I'll player aspect and definitely just that change in team dynamics and team trust within the team. Like just being more cohesive out as a unit. There are a lot of players, and I like the nonlinear approach that the team, the producers and writers behind The Last Dance took to this documentary to just kind of help tell the overall greater story of the Bulls' legacy, not just focusing on their final season, but just their legacy as a whole and development and how that legacy began truly, and how you have players like, okay, let me not name drop because I always forget before I say the names. So I'm just gonna move forward. But Oakley, that's what I'm thinking of. Like, how you have players like Charles Oakley who helped Michael develop who he is, who he was at that time, and player development of Michael, but then being able to transfer that from Michael to the Bulls as a whole with, transferring from Collins to Jackson. And so, yes, if that ain't, I don't even know.
It does.
Great.
Yeah, I like how this documentary has done a great job. We've been following that 97-98 season, but then it likes to give us more context on that season and why certain players came to be. We have to go back, and we have to go back to Jordan and his days at UNC, like in 1 and 2, and Pippen in episode 2 we got, and then Rodman in 3 and 4. And I think it's really helped, I guess, put into perspective what was going on in that 97-98 season, as well as with the management, with someone like Krause who comes out with a statement that says, oh, we'd love to have Jordan back if he wants to come back, but Phil is done. Phil Jackson, this is his last season. Like, I don't know. It's just so idiotic now to see him say something like that.
Oh, that's Chicago's. Like, I remember when LeBron was up for free agency the first time.
Don't even get me started on that.
Go, where's LeBron? A lot of it relied on, like, people don't realize a lot of that relied on Dwayne Wade and where he was going to go. And so Dwayne's from Chicago. We wanted Dwayne back. We wanted him to play for the Bulls. He would have loved to play for the Bulls, but their management,
Gar Forman.
It's just
always been Gar Forman.
It makes me so mad. It's just terrible, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Better days are ahead, though.
We hope and pray. We do.
Yeah. Well, you see, that transitions perfectly into, the ultimate cliffhanger that they left at. And Maya, I want to give you an opportunity to answer that real quick before I get into this. But, just what did you think about, what was different about that team, that 91 team, than the years before that?
I mean, yeah, you guys covered a lot of it. I would also just say, maybe this is just me speculating, maybe their mindset changed, where in 88, 89, they were focused on, we got to win the title. Like, that was their main goal. And then once they got beat by the Pistons both times, they're like, okay, before we can win a title, we're jumping too ahead. We got to beat the Pistons. We got to figure out how to beat them. So once they figure out how to beat them, that's obviously what changed.
And then 97-98, that team to beat was the Jazz, and that you saw there, I mean, they had a pretty substantial lead in the second game on the road in Utah, and the Jazz came all the way back and beat them actually pretty handily. And they swept them in that season series 2-0, since, opposite conferences, which kind of sets up for an interesting storyline as we continue.
And that's what I was going to say, because it's a perfect transition into this like ultimate cliffhanger of, what really did go into actually getting that team together to make another run at the Jazz, to be able to defeat them. Spoiler alert, if it's only happened 22 years ago. So, they obviously were able to handle the Jazz again, but really what it took to get back to that point where they could beat them, and what did you guys think, of Jerry Krause being the one who's saying these comments, saying at the beginning of the season that, no matter what, if we win every single game, Phil Jackson, who has just won us 5 NBA championships over the past 7 years, will be gone no matter what. I can't even imagine any general manager in their right mind who at least wants to keep their job saying something like that in the modern NBA.
I don't know why. Like, why did he want to get rid of Phil Jackson so much? Does anyone know? Like, was there a reason or?
I think they touched on it in earlier past episodes that just, like a conflict of interest and stuff like that. Conflict of like, not necessarily personal interest, but just like inability to like just get along, I guess, basically. So
I think it was the direction of the franchise. The management, Reinsdorf and Krause, believed that a lot of these players were just past their prime, maybe aside from Michael, and their just time was done. So they just thought, they were kind of thinking it's just weird. They were like, okay, they're done, but really, it's just weird because the management had the opportunity to keep everyone together. It was up to them, to decide who they're going to bring back. It was in their hands, and they kind of let it slip out. And that was just a big mistake. I mean, I think that goes to a bigger point that the first couple episodes made, just about how, I think Krause, there was just kind of a comment made about how management, wins more than like the players themselves, when you look at a team. And the player, Jordan and a lot of the players are like, we're the ones going out there and winning these games. And I think that's something that Bulls management in the 90s just, they didn't really understand, and maybe they took for granted after winning those 5 championships and then ultimately the 6th.
And it begs the question, and I think this is something that we talk about even today, of does the general manager, are they more responsible for putting together a championship team? Like, should they get more credit for putting together the team, or is it the fact that the players performed so well and that they did so well? Like, no one would ever say that Jerry Krause was more responsible than Michael Jordan for winning the 6 championships, right?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's showing right now. I mean, you bring Steve Kerr in, the Warriors won a lot of games. I mean, but I mean, think about all the superstars and firepower they had. At one point last year, I think they had 5 All-Stars when they brought on DeMarcus Cousins, and it was like, are you kidding me? At that point, it was before the ACL tear. And then, this year where everyone gets hurt, Kevin Durant leaves, and suddenly they're the worst team in the league. So maybe the players do mean something, I don't know. I think it gets to a bigger point here.
I think it's a little bit of you have to have enough of a vision in terms of being a GM to be able to say these players can make a cohesive unit and I can see, this guy is able to rebound and hustle and able to work well with this type of player and so forth and so on. But it also so it's that much in terms of like, if you're an analyst or a true like diehard fan, I think where it makes where all that kind of credit will be granted. But like for somebody, just a casual person who's like, yeah, let me watch this basketball game. It's, it's the players, it's how well the players are able to work cohesively with one another. Like if you're not able to work, like if Michael and Scottie were never able to come together mentally, there would not have been 6 championships. If they were at heads with one another, we've seen players be at heads with each other, at odds, with one another and break up a completely successful team because the players couldn't get it together. So, I mean, I believe that it's the players, but can the GMs get more credit than they do? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, they're not the ones out there making all those different types of moves, different types of successes.
I mean, a more modern example, how many times do we think about the Thunder, and they had Durant, Westbrook, and James Harden. They had 3 MVPs on their team, and they split them up. They traded James Harden away to the Rockets for, I don't even remember what, because it was so bad. And Durant ended up, they chose Westbrook over Durant. So Durant wasn't happy with that. He left town, and they were left with Westbrook, and they realized they couldn't win with him and his play style, who they chose. I don't know. It just goes to show, man, like all the what ifs, if you don't have, what could have been if you kept your core together. I mean, that Thunder team could have probably dominated the West, but we'll never know.
Yeah. Hey, it's always the big questions, well, the what ifs. What if Jordan had never retired, that first time? What if they won 8 in a row? Would there even be a debate about anything else ever? I mean, seriously. And then, what if that team had stayed together and you have the Thunder team, you have 3 MVPs on the same team and you can't keep them there because of management decisions and because of, split personalities and just all these big factors. But, just to kind of wrap everything up and put a bow on it, guys, I want to get a final thought from everybody real quick. What's like the one thing that sticks out the most that either surprised you or that you've just learned about this Bulls team and really this era of the NBA that you didn't know before these first 4 episodes?
I will
Maya,
say
I'll start with you.
I have a lot more respect for Scottie Pippen. I kind of explained that earlier. I never was a fan of him. And then after watching these first 4 episodes and getting more of his backstory and seeing what he went through, I don't put him on a pedestal, but maybe like a short pedestal. Like he's up there on my list now.
Mm-hmm. And Kendall?
This is a good question. I guess I'll kind of keep it with Scottie as well. Like I've always been a fan of Scottie, but that's just because of the Batman Robin aspect. And it's like always Scottie as an afterthought, which is very unfortunate. But like to know just how true, like I learned how cold Scottie was thanks to like this documentary. It's like I didn't know Scottie was putting up those kind of numbers and leading the league as he did, not just being helping the Bulls, but like Scottie was like Scottie Pippen. Like he wasn't anybody to, play around with, and just once again, Chicago's front offices. So not learning, but just being able to hear like some of Reinsdorf's comments in the last week's episodes. I was just like, it didn't surprise me because I just know, but just being able to hear it and just being like, understood.
I've enjoyed watching a lot of the highlights, particularly of Jordan, of like kind of the mid-range game, because that's something we just don't see a lot. I mean, his ability to rise up, take a jumper, and then also his ability in traffic to drive and switch hands and there was one shot, I think it was against the Pistons when Lambeer tried to hard foul on him, and he like reversed, no look, threw up a ball. I'm like, how do you do that? It takes a special player to make those kind of shots. And then the other thing, it makes me think, the East was so dominant. I mean, back then, you had the Showtime Lakers as well, who the Bulls went on to beat and face in '91. But it makes me wonder, was the real prize winning the East and beating the Pistons? I mean, you kind of heard from some of those players. I mean, they were more satisfied than that than the championship. I mean, I think a lot of them said. So the East was very dominant then. It kind of rings kind of similar to what we're seeing in the Western Conference these days.
Mm-hmm.
Where we saw like the Rockets and Warriors these past years, and we're like, that's the real NBA Finals, because it's kind of what we thought, and that's kind of what the East was back then, it seems.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see those modern day comparisons too, because that's exactly the same way that it was. Like the East back then is the West now, and eventually it kind of, changed as the league developed and things like that. And, one of the things, and I was just talking about this with my dad yesterday, I thought one of the coolest things that, I always knew Jordan was a really charismatic guy. I always knew that he was like really good on camera. He was really great with reporters and stuff like that. But my goodness, like when he was in the midst of just getting the crap beaten out of him, like every game against the Pistons, or, just all this pressure from just around the league, that every single eye in the world, that follows sports was just looking to what he was doing. And he would just be so calm, cool, and collected every single interview. He never got mad when people would ask him about, other players, or even like himself, like, what is he going to do? Like, it always makes me think of like Kevin Durant with like the free agency stuff. And like, he's like, stop asking, like, I'm not going to give you anything or something like that. And Jordan every time would just say, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, he would just give the same answer. He would never lose his temper. And I thought that was so cool.
You're right. Composure is so important. And it's something that's really overlooked a lot, because, when a lot of players face the media, or sometimes, it's hard to keep that perfect image. I mean, think think about how hard it's been. I mean, how many cameras and, you turn on a TV in the morning and how many times does LeBron's name or picture come up, and people are just waiting sometimes for these guys to mess up, I mean, I'm a lot similar things with Jordan, and, it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of pressure there. I think that's something that's really underrated about the greatness of someone like Michael Jordan. Back then, his ability to kind of stay out of trouble. I mean, obviously you saw what Rodman was doing, and Jordan would never be a Rodman. I just never had that in him. He was more focused on winning the team, the game. And it's not saying that Rodman wasn't. It's just that their personalities were different in that way.
And you can say Michael Jordan was more of a mature player and person than young Dennis Rodman was at the time.
And then like for modern day, in terms of just like composure on camera, I think it was probably less of a superstar aspect that I kind of was talking about earlier. Between now and then, like we hold up players more so than the teams that they play on nowadays, where it's like, I'm a LeBron fan, so LeBron's in Cleveland, I'm in Cleveland. LeBron's in LA, I'm in LA. Whereas, yeah, people were Michael Jordan's fans, but they were 9 times out of 10 fans of the Bulls as well as an entire team than just the one. Like Jordan was probably the reason, but it's less of a singled out aspect then than it is now. So that's why I feel like, he had that different type of composure. It wasn't just like a different day in the media.
Yeah, you got it. And this docuseries is really bringing all that to light. And it's been great through these first 4 episodes. And it was great to have all of you guys on here to talk about it so far. Thanks so much for joining me.
Of course.
I can't wait to see if the Bulls win the title.
I know. Like I said, spoiler alert, we'll never know what happened 22 years ago. I love to see it. Well, guys, thank you so much. The Zoom room is complete once again. We'll have some more episodes for you throughout the week here on YouTube. And of course, The Last Dance is on ESPN every Sunday. They're airing the next 2 episodes for the next 3 weeks. So we have a lot of great content to break down and a lot of good stuff to get into over the summer.
Yes, for sure.
Thanks, Brandon. And thanks, Kendall, and Maya as well.
Of course.
Good talking to everyone.
Thank you, guys. See you at the next one.